All right, welcome to the English 223 Week 2 lecture. We are going to go over chapters 3, 4, and 5, just giving some highlights and overview of that discussion. We're going to look at chapter 3, perception and communication, and then we'll look at information for nonverbal communication as well as verbal communication. So first we're looking at perception and communication. We need to understand what perception is. First of all, when we look at the process of human perception, that's the active process of creating meaning by selecting, organizing, and interpreting people, objects, events, situations, and other phenomena. So when we look at this slide, we can see the process we go through as we look at perception. We select what we're going to pay attention to, we organize what it means, we interpret that. So we perceive everything. That's what the selection part of this is. When we're driving down the freeway and you're going somewhere, your eyes take in every car that passes. We see the mountains, we see the sky, we see every single car we've passed, both directions. That's being taken in, but we're not selecting to pay attention to all of that. Instead, we look at these things, the qualities of the phenomena, self-indication, like what matters to us, our motives and needs, and our culture dictate to us what we pay attention to in any given situation. So in the situation of driving down the street and taking in everything as we go down the freeway, we're paying attention to the cars closest to us. We've been trained, the ones that are, going to be a threat, or we need to know what's in our way. So we're paying attention, selecting to pay attention to, in our motives and needs, the ones that we need to pay attention to get to our destination safely, or that are between us and them. But sometimes, every once in a while, you're driving along, and then on the far lane of the far side of the freeway going the opposite direction, we have a fire truck with lights and sirens, and we select to pay attention to that when we haven't selected anything else driving in that lane, because of the qualities of that phenomenon, the lights, the fire truck, the siren. And then our culture has taught us what that means. It's an emergency vehicle. We know what that noise means. We know what those lights mean. So there's other things that change that selection beyond what we might normally select to pay attention to. So first, while we take everything in, our brain selects what it is that we're actually going to pay attention to. Then we look at organization. So this is the constructivism. So we're going to organize and interpret our experiences. So these cognitive structures that are called schemata, which is a big fancy word for our thought meaning. It kind of means what we think that means. So these four types that we're going to look at that you see in the readings: the prototype, personal construct, stereotype, or a script. Prototype is that most representative example of a category. So when you think of a prototype, like trying to organize what a behavior is, when someone treats you in a specific way, we might organize what we've perceived according to the prototype that we have of someone. So our best example, our most representative example of what a friend is, this person always treats us this way. So when someone else does that same kind of nice gesture, we might organize their behavior according to our prototype, that person who's the best example of a friend. And so they behave that way, so they must be a friend. So that kind of is how a prototype construction happens. With our personal construct, we took it that as a bipolar, that mental yardstick. And when it talks about bipolar, we're looking at extreme ends. This is good, that is bad. This is nice, this is mean. People who behave this way are kind, people who behave this way are cruel. And that personal construct is different for different people. You probably already know that from interacting with different people in your families, from interacting with or marrying into or dating into other families, and seeing or even having friends, that things you believe mean one thing, they might not even think about at all. And so that personal construct goes with a cultural representation. We're happy, weddings are happy, funerals are sad. That's not always true. But we also have that. People who are nice and buy you gifts are kind. That's your friend. But we also, so then we see, oh, this person never buys us anything or never brings us gifts, so they must not be a friend. So good people bring you nice things, bad people don't. But that's not true, because if gifts aren't your love language, then that might not be something you express. And so, but that bipolar personal construct is something how we organize information we're bringing in, even though that's not necessarily what people are communicating to us. Just another side note for how important it is and why it's so important that we interpret other people on their terms instead of ours. A stereotype, using that for constructing meaning, that's when we make a predictive generalization, not just about people or cultures or things, but situations. When I'm in this situation A, usually B happens. So I'm in a situation similar to A, I expect B to happen. Or everyone I've ever met who's from this neighborhood behaves this certain way, so I predict that everyone else from this neighborhood is going to act that way. And stereotypes can be detrimental, but they do also serve a purpose, and they often come from somewhere. So if you think about, like, I don't want to stereotype, but stereotypically speaking, if I'm walking down a street after dark and I see a group of teenagers who are dressed in a certain way and they're being all secretive, I will stereotype that perhaps they are up to no good, or maybe they're behaving in what appears to be an aggressive manner. But I don't want to stereotype, so I'm fine walking down that sidewalk and walking right through that group of them and just being friendly. No, I'm not an idiot, so I might be 100% wrong, but I'm going to go ahead and use what I can from the stereotype that perhaps at this hour, with that type of behavior looking that certain way, stereotypically, I believe they might be up to no good. Not my job to find out whether or not they are. So I'm cool with crossing the street and relying on that stereotype and walking down the other side. So they do serve a purpose. And finally, we look at scripts. And the scripts are the things, the guides you've written for yourself in your life through your life experience, as to how you should behave in a certain situation. And these, everyone has scripts, but they need to be revisited, because these things can be really useful in helping us know how to behave in certain situations, how to have social graces, how to interact with people. But scripts can also be detrimental when we write them out to, this is how one behaves with money, and it's irresponsible. Or we write out a script that relationships are supposed to be hard because we've seen the way our parents treat each other, and it's this constant struggle, and it's okay to be mistreated because that's the script I have, that if you really cared about me, we'd be yelling and fighting more than you just wanting to discuss all the time. And so that script can be detrimental, because then we're so used to unhealthy that when we run into healthy, it doesn't play our script right, and so we walk away from it. So we have to revisit what our scripts about relationships are, and what our scripts about money are, and what our scripts about friendship are, and how we interact with people, or scripts about parenting that we might have, or scripts about professional behavior at work, or different social scripts as well. Because it may be that our scripts have been written in a negative fashion because of our life experience when we had less control over it, or the things we saw as children with other people interacting with each other. And now we're playing out that script, and it's continuing an unhealthy pattern. So we want to revisit those to make sure that we have healthier scripts, and we can rewrite those, but that can be hard. First thing we have to do is recognize that if, say you're rewriting a relationship script, just because it always seemed like there was drama and angst and fighting, the lack of that doesn't mean a lack of love. In fact, it generally and most likely means the exact opposite. That in order for it to be good, we must constantly be fighting for it until we're drained at the end of the day. So we're going to rewrite that script that says, maybe that's how mom and dad did, or maybe that's how it was in my first marriage, or whatever it is, and rewrite that so that when we run into healthy, we can play out a healthy script instead of continuing a cycle of codependence or unhealthy scripts in those relationships. Same thing with money. That if we've had an unhealthy script with money, that we had maybe parents that were get it, spend it, and constantly living or having, the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th house repossessed and all of these things happening, and we grew up in that constant battle with money. We might have a script that's written in our life that's a constant battle of money, of like get, spend, and that living in perpetual excessive debt and repossession is our normal script. Perhaps we need to look at that and rewrite it so we can have a healthy relationship with money instead of thinking that that's an impossibility. So it's just a couple of examples of how we need to visit our scripts, and because our scripts will dictate this happens, this is how we behave. We're in a relationship, so this is how we behave. You were kind to me, but the people who care about me are generally rude to me, so I don't know how to interpret that, so I'll behave differently. So we definitely want to make sure that we recognize what it is that's dictating our behavior when we're using this to understand where we're coming from. After organization, we now interpret. We've organized using our thought patterns, what kind of behaviors happen. Now we're going to interpret the meaning of what we've taken in. So this is a subjective process. It's how we explain what our perceptions mean and help them make sense to us. So when we look at locus, stability, specificity, and responsibility, we're looking at these different things. Locus talks about whether or not your locus of control. Do you feel like you have an internal locus of control where you get to control the majority of what happens in your life? You have choice. You can make an impact. Or do you have a more external locus of control where you feel like the majority of what happens in your life is based on luck, other people's behavior, who you know? Or do you fall somewhere in that healthy in between, which leans more closely to internal, but also recognizes there are some external? So there's some quizzes we can put up for that, for external locus of control or internal locus of control, so you can test that. The healthiest ones with that have a strong sense of an internal locus of control, but can also recognize the outside factors. Stability, we're looking at, is this thing we've perceived, is it stable or unstable? Like, is it consistently this way, or does what it means change depend on the situation? When we look at specificity, we talk about, is this interpretation specific to this event or this phenomena, or can I apply this meaning globally to everything that happens in this realm? And then responsibility, is what I'm interpreting within my personal control, or is it beyond my control to affect or change or perceive? And this changes the way we see things and the way that we perceive. Next, we want to look at different kinds of errors that we can make when we're interpreting things that we perceive. So we're going to look at attributional errors. We have self-serving bias and the fundamental attributional error. Both of these are errors in interpretation of information. So the self-serving bias is when we interpret everything based on how we want it to be perceived. This is similar to the logical fallacy of confirmation bias, where it's I only look for things that prove what I know. But self-serving bias is when we look at information through the lens of how does this mean what I want it to mean. And we can see this in defensive listening. We can see this in interactions with other people where they interpret behavior so that they can keep being angry, or somebody they don't like does something kind and they interpret it according to trying to stick it to them, that kind of thing. We can also see it with severe arrogance, where people who will interpret other people's behavior toward them when they say, hey, that's inappropriate, or you're being rude, or you're being mean, and they say, you're just jealous. Well, sometimes maybe that's true. Maybe your mom was right sometimes that they're just jealous. Or, and moms do that too, when they're saying they're just jealous. Maybe we need to recognize, because we don't want to see the truth, that maybe they are right. Maybe you are being rude. I think of an example where this woman came and gave a speech to some of the young people in the area I grew up in, and she did a really great job talking about bullying and not being a bully, and that she had been one growing up. And then she said, and I really realized what that was when my daughter was 13 or 14 and participating in these, and she was bullied. Well, I knew her daughter, and she was condescending and rude and a know-it-all and mean, and she teased other people. And I was like, your perception is a little bit skewed. So she sees other people's behavior toward her daughter, those other kids that didn't want to play with her daughter or invite her or hang around with her and didn't really like her, and she sort of got well, she interpreted that in this self-serving bias that the other 13, 14-year-olds not wanting to be around her daughter, not going out of their way to be friendly and not including her, was them being bullies toward her daughter, without seeing that her daughter not just didn't fit in, but was not nice to them and was weird to them and was rude and condescending toward them. And so other kids didn't want to be around her because she wasn't nice to them. But she interpreted the not being around them to fit her self-serving bias, to fit her narrative that her daughter was great and wonderful and perfect and these other kids were just mean, because she would have had to step out of that self-serving bias, the attributional error, and see more clearly to interpret it as maybe there's something that she's doing that's making it so that they don't want to be around her. While that wouldn't give them permission to be cruel to her, then they weren't. That was a reason why kids just didn't want to be around her. And that self-serving bias does that. It skews us, puts those glasses on so that we only interpret things to mean what we want them to mean, regardless of what the evidence shows us. We interpret somebody else's cruelty or leave me alone as playing hard to get, or they're ignoring us as, maybe they want us to try harder, and instead they just don't be around us. So that they're mean to us is just a difficult part of their relationship, or maybe we need to take out what we want to be true and see things as they are. And that's that self-serving bias we want to watch out for. That is when we distort that so we can maintain to what we want it to be. That's part of the reason, is maintaining that self-esteem so we can keep being right, so we don't have to see the areas that we need to change. So we don't have to see something that we've invested a lot into and realize it's a failure because we didn't want to see how it was. And so want to keep that self-esteem of, I just need to try harder. That's not what's really happening. And it's a hard thing to fight against sometimes. Additionally, there's the fundamental attribution error, and this is when at the foundation of our attribution, there's something wrong fundamentally with the meaning we're attributing to the phenomenon we're interpreting. So it's also called the attribution effect or correspondence bias. This is when we put undue emphasis on internal characteristics or internal motivations for other people's behavior rather than considering external factors. For example, we're walking down the hall and we wave at someone and they don't wave back, and we immediately attribute their lack of response to they're stuck up. There's an internal motivation because they're stuck up, they don't like me, something like that, rather than considering maybe they didn't see you, maybe they were distracted, maybe they were on the phone, like any number of other external things that could have been part of what their response was. And so that's what that fundamental attribution error is, when we attribute an internal motivation to someone else's behavior rather than considering external motivations. I'm standing with my arms closed and I'm bouncing a lot. I don't want to be here. I'm in a big hurry. I don't even like you. Or I'm cold and I'm tired and I'm trying to pay attention, so I keep moving. And so that's what that is. And so we have to be wary of those attributional errors, that bias that we look at with that self-serving bias in trying to make everything that happens, we attribute motivation to only what we want to believe is true, or this fundamental attribution error where we fundamentally have made an error in attributing motivation to other people's behavior or to the things that we perceive in their behavior. Some of the things that influence our perception: physiology, age, culture, cognitive abilities, yourself. Your physiology affects your perception. Quite simply, it can in the sense of being tall or short or thin or larger, or any of those things can affect it, but also whether you're healthy or you're sick. That affects the way we perceive things and what things mean and what our priorities are. Your age can affect that. because of experience, but also because of some of the things that come with being younger or older as well. With your culture, socially, where you fit in your culture, what your cultural roles are, the way people interact with each other, or how those interactions are perceived based on cultural norms. For example, in Western culture, specifically the United States, if a guy gets down and is 3 or 4 inches away from another guy's face, and they're speaking to each other, getting louder, get in my face, we know what that means. That is an anger move. That's an aggressive fight move. But there are also other cultures, specifically in the Middle East, that that's just how people talk. And so even when they argue or whatever, they'll get down in there so they can get that intensity, but it doesn't mean punch me, it's about to get thrown down. We're just having a discussion still. So culture can affect the way we perceive those behaviors. And then, of course, whether or not cognitive complexity, if it's if the behavior, the understanding is too complex for someone's ability, that influences perception. We see this all the time. Anytime you see something where you're like, oh my gosh, why do you keep doing that? Maybe they really, don't you know better? Maybe they don't. And also person-centeredness, your ability to center on someone else or attribute someone else's behavior to someone else's motives instead of the other way around, to give other people their stuff and keep yours for yourself, in the sense that my life experience, my motivation, that's what affects my behavior, my understanding. Other people's life experience and their motivation affects their behavior and their understanding, rather than trying to use my experience to explain someone else's choices. And that's hard to do, especially if you've gone through and are on the other side of things and you're watching other people. But that person-centeredness, trying to really understand the person at their core, rather than just a tribute meeting. For example, if you know someone that is a really honest person, they're a person of high integrity, and that's just who they are, and then you see something that seems a little bit shady about them. Maybe you find out that their degree isn't as good as isn't actually finished and you thought it was. Are you person-centered in there must be something wrong, let them explain, because I know they're honest, so if this seems dishonest, there must be something wrong, rather than just immediately going to, they're a liar, because that's how your perception works, or because you wish they weren't so successful or whatever. And so person-centeredness looks at attributing, understanding that whole person, who they are, where they come from, how well do you know them, do they really behave that way? And so I think about that like a few times that I've had situations like that with work or different things where it may have looked like someone was being shady, but I knew that person so well, I knew they weren't shady. And so when someone asked me about it, I said, there must be something we're not understanding, or some bit of information we don't know, because there is no way that person would behave this way. No way. And, you take another minute longer and you realize, it was a licensing thing, that it was actually a governmental snafu, and that person really was everything they said they were. And I was like, here are these other people ready to jump down their throat and throw them out and call them dishonest and ruin their reputations without even talking to them about it, because they were so sure. Look right here, it says they don't really have what they said they have. And so that's that person-centeredness says, let me think about you before I decide how to perceive this. The implicit personality theory is a collection of unspoken, sometimes unconscious assumptions about how various qualities fit together in human personalities. And that's blah, blah, blah for. We have this implicit personality theory is people who act like this have a nice personality. People who act like this are mean. People who act like that are honest. And so we take a collection of behaviors or attributes and decide that's what kind of person those behaviors make. Implicitly, that's their personality. We also know those things kind of cross from each other and we get different information. So a few guidelines for improving your perception and communication. First of all, recognize that all perceptions are partial and subjective. Avoid mind reading. Check your perceptions with other people. Distinguish between facts and inferences. Guard against the self-serving bias. Guard against the fundamental attribution bias. And monitor labels. So when we look at that first one, there's no possible way that you could have a complete perception, because unless you lived someone else's life exactly as that other person, you can't have a complete perception. And so when we take a step back and say, I really, no matter how much of the picture I can see, I can't see the whole picture. We can improve our communication by realizing our perception isn't complete. Our feelings and our views can be valid at the same time as someone else's opposing feelings and views are valid. So we want to accept that we don't really see the whole picture, the whole motivation. Try not to mind read. That is a very frustrating thing for me, but I know what you're going to say. And we already know, as we talked about before, that the studies have shown that when you tell someone you know what they're going to say, even if you're right, they change it. So either you're wrong and it's not helping the communication, or you're right and they change what they were going to say so that you're not right and you're not helping the communication. So it's not helpful. But mind reading also in attributing motivation to other people's behavior and then reacting to our perception rather than what they really meant inhibits communication, makes it less effective. You want to be able to distinguish between facts and inferences. Facts are things exactly as they happened, the action. When the minute we decide what those things mean, we've moved to inference. So the example I've often given is if I'm standing up there lecturing class and someone throws the door open and throws an eraser up to the front of the room and screams, "I hate you! I'm so angry with you! I can't wait until I never have to see you again!" And they walk out and slam the door. The facts, what do we know? We know that a person came in and threw an eraser and yelled. We know the behavior. The facts are the behaviors. When we decide what those behaviors mean, we've moved into inference. Ooh, we know that guy hates you. We don't know that. It's a pretty good presumption based on evidence, but that is an inference. We've inferred from this set of behavior that that's how he feels. But maybe he got the wrong room. Or maybe I gave Dave $5 right before class and said, hey, at 7:15, come in and yell and scream at me. Like, we don't know that he hates me. We're inferring that from the information. The only thing when we have facts are just the things that happened. The minute we start attributing motivation or going through that perception and attributing meaning to the facts, that's an inference, and that really is opinion. So we want to be able to know the difference between those things. So someone comes in and they're always interrupting you and they're not respectful of your space. We go into a discussion with that. We say, oh my gosh, you totally don't respect me. You totally hate me. That's a fact, not a fact. An inference. They're like, what are you talking about? I totally respect you. I don't even hate you. What are you talking about? So now we have a fight. Whereas if we stick to the facts of the behavior, we can say, when you come in and interrupt me, I feel disrespected. That's a fact. You came in and interrupted me. That's a description of a behavior. Stating what my feelings are, description of my feelings, which I'm an expert on. So I've stated facts. And now we can have a discussion instead of using inferences as if they're facts. And then, of course, we've talked extensively about the self-serving bias and the fundamental attribution error, so we want to guard against those. And then monitor the labels we give, because we can't tend to interact with people based on the labels we've set for them. Oh, he's lazy, so we interact with that person like they're lazy. That guy's a jerk, so we interact with them like they're a jerk. I have to watch with this sometimes with students because there'll be one interaction where it seemed off, or they seemed aggressive, or they seemed uninterested, and I don't interact all that often with some, and so I then have that like, oh, that person's really aggressive, or oh, that person's really needy. And it was just one off day, but so you have to guard against those labels so that you're interacting with people from a fresh stance or from an actual stance instead of just our perceived concept of who they are, how they act. So that's looking at perception and communication and how we can go through that. There's a lot more on abstraction and different things like that as you get through the rest. Read through chapter 3 and get that information from there. We have that part 1 of this video that cut off, and then this one, and then we're going to look at chapter 4 and 5 real quickly, and we'll keep it in total under or around that hour mark, hopefully. So we are going to look now at chapter 4. Chapter 4, The World of Words. So we're actually going to look at the nature of the words we use in our language. The symbolic nature of language we talk about in this chapter. We can see that we learn that symbols are arbitrary, they're ambiguous, they're abstract. What this means is when they're arbitrary, really when language started, whatever language you're looking at, whoever started it, it was really arbitrary. We picked a set of sounds in that language and decided those sounds mean this. So the word shoe, those sounds aren't intrinsically connected to the thing you put on your foot. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a different word for it in all these different languages. There's a few words, they call them onomatopoeia, and that just means words that sound like what they are. So like could tell a ring, 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 or drip, drip, drip. So we can see where those words came from, just mimicking the sound with human language, but still arbitrary to just decide that that's what we're going to call that now. Symbols are also ambiguous. That means what words mean isn't clear-cut, and anyone who's ever been in a misunderstanding knows that you've seen people look at you like, that's not real. My grandma, or they also change, and that's what makes them ambiguous. So what they mean to one person isn't necessarily what they mean to another. When we gave that example of call you later versus talk to you later. That call you later means, for most people, that sometime today I will have another phone call where we will interact, whereas talk to you later or see you later just means bye. So, but apparently there are people who think I'll call you later means the same as talk to you later or see you later. There's also, I give an example of a time when my whole family's gathered for Thanksgiving, and my little sister who's in high school's boyfriend was dropping her off. And my grandma went out to get the mail. Everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, are gathered around the table. And my grandma goes out to get the mail. And she comes back in, they ask my sisters out there. And she said, oh, yeah, they're out making love in the car. Excuse me, what? But for grandma, in her teenage years, in the late 20s, pitch and woo, making love, making out, same thing. They're kissing. But that doesn't mean the same thing anymore. So that meaning has shifted. It means different things to different people. It got quiet and then everyone just started laughing. My poor sister was embarrassed. It was hilarious. But those meanings are ambiguous. And what does later mean specifically? And what does more mean? And so they don't always mean the same thing to everybody. And then symbols are abstract. So we can't write the word shoe on the board and then peel it off and wear it out. It's not the actual thing. It's just an idea. It gets really in there. But they stand for those things, but they are not those things. They're just words. So the SHOE does stand for the thing I put on my foot, but it isn't the thing I put on my foot. It's just a word. So with the principles of verbal communication, these are important when we look at this for verbal and nonverbal. Language and culture often reflect each other. We can see this in proverbs of different languages in different parts of the world because it really shows what's important in that culture. I mean, you look at Western culture and we have time is money. It's about money and getting ahead. Early bird gets the worm. And all of those, he who has the gold makes the rules. These different things that talk about time and money and getting ahead and working in that way. And then you have other cultures where they talk about family and learning. And those are their proverbs. And you can see what's important to that culture through the study of their language. The meanings of language are subjective. We talked about that a little bit. Language use is rule-guided. We have communication rules, the when and how and to whom we speak and how we speak to those people in different situations. Regulative rules about whose turn it is, when it's my turn or your turn, and how we interact with other people to regulate communication and when and how it happens. And then we have those constitutive rules where we talk about what's correct and what's not correct. Punctuation also shapes meaning, not just in our writing, the commas, the periods, the way we punctuate our speaking shapes meaning. with emphasis and voice inflection, but also in our writing. We've seen that let's eat grandma and let's eat grandma, comma, saves lives. Punctuation shapes meaning. It does. It changes what you're saying. There's a lot of words in these. They're for your reading. Feel free to read ahead as you look at this slide. I will just be explaining. We also talk about the symbolic abilities of language in this chapter. That language defines. We use words, to define meaning, to define people, to define situations in our perception and to understand things. We cannot even contemplate our lives if we don't have a language skill, because we don't have words to contemplate in. And that's just fascinating to me. That's sort of something we learned in studying the feral children, that if they aren't introduced to that language early on, they never can. And that idea that just to lay there and think about what you want to do or where you're going to go or that you enjoyed a sunset can't really happen without words. Because even trying to think about how to make it happen doesn't happen without words. There's feelings, but we can't understand or express or think about those feelings if we don't have words. But we use those to define and shape meaning and give meaning to us. Language evaluates because it's not neutral. There is value in the words. Something that seems innocent, but there's a meaning. We tweak words specifically. Writers and communicators and politicians generally are very careful with word choice, so that sometimes they mean to sound nice but also get the dig in, or they don't want to completely commit to something, but when they want to say something that sounds nice, they fluff with things like, we're going to be better and we're going to have hope or be great or all of those. What does that look like? But those buzzwords are so emotional for people that they connect to that, but they don't mean anything. And words do. So always is different from forever. And that word choice, there's meaning in that. So it is an intrinsic quality of language that language evaluates. It is very difficult to find words that are completely neutral. They have different things to different people. I mean, even when you say, just to say dad, like for someone that's going to be that warm, amazing Superman feeling. For someone else, it's going to inspire a feeling of abandonment. For someone else, it's going to inspire a panic or love or whatever. So just one word that has different meaning in it and evaluates things there as well. A language also organizes our perceptions. So we talked about that a little bit, where the words we use change the way we talk about something. I know how many times I've told a story and I start to tell it and I say, I had this friend. Nope. I know a person who, because it says that word friend puts someone in a category that attributes to them a whole series of feelings and behaviors and connections for me that I don't attribute to everyone. And so sometimes I have a friend, nope, I actually don't like that person at all, not a friend. And I can't say that. And so we organize our perceptions and by the words that we use to describe what happened and how we feel about that. And having a wider vocabulary, or wider, especially emotional or descriptive vocabulary, can help us to be more specific and more clear with other people when we're discussing, but also with ourselves when we're trying to understand. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to have more words so you can be more specific and more accurate. I had a friend once, we were having a discussion, and he said, and I've told this before, but he said, oh, that's heartbreaking. I know, you're going to say it's heartbreaking. And I said, no, it's soul shattering. And he's like, oh, because that was the more accurate words. It really was. But it's a similar concept, but more specific. And so we can organize our perceptions and understand them better, as well as communicate them better when we have more words to do that with. Language allows hypothetical thought. When we want to think about where we're going, where we've been, planning, we have to do that with words. It also allows for our self-reflection. This I, me thing is, the me part is socially aware of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, filters us, keeps us in check. or that I part generally just acts on instinct. You're angry. You made me mad. I want to yell at you. I don't like that. I get rid of it. It's our instinct versus the filter that we have from our socially aware self. But using language, we can think about how we behave, what we want to do differently, how we want to change, what we want to do, what we did in the past, what we could have done different, how we're going to behave in the future, how we want to change. In order to set a goal, we have to have words. In order to consider what we've done, to think about ourselves, we have to have words. And so it's very important that we understand that, and that when we understand words, they have more power in our lives because we can be more specific. For example, when I set a goal, instead of just setting goals anymore, I list what I want to become. This year, I want to become healthy. And then I describe what that means to me, and then describe the behaviors I need to engage in every day in order to become that. But switching it from a goal of, I want to lose 10 pounds to I want to become a healthy person changes the way I see it, because I'm becoming something, and it's a transition that I'm successful at every day, instead of a change I need to make because I'm not good enough yet. And so words are very powerful in creating and affecting our perceptions and our understanding and the way we see ourselves and the world and our place in it, the way we interact with each other and our relationships. They're very powerful. And the more we understand these attributes of language and their ability that we have with words, the more we can use that very, very powerful element or thing, I guess, those to enhance our lives and our communication and our relationships and our employment and our jobs, and that words matter, and we're more specific and we have more words so we can be more accurate in our interaction and our speaking and our communication with ourselves and others. Language shapes our perceptions. The way we say things affects the way we see things. Language can totalize. We do that when we use a word to act like that's the beginning and end of that. A couple of examples talks about, it's part of labeling. When we say, he's whatever attribute, whatever his name of his religion is, or their sexual orientation is, or their color is, and we say, oh, that's a black man, or that's a gay man, or that's a Catholic man, as if that's their beginning and end in every description and all they are. They're not an artist, or a dad, or a brother, or a friend. They're just that. And that's how language can totalize when we use it to label. They're disabled. And smart and funny and talented and successful. And, oh yeah. And I think Lance Armstrong, cancer survivor, I watched time trials for a Tour de France a few years after he'd beaten cancer. And they kept calling him that as if it were part of his name. We have the time trials in, and they give, Bob Jones's time trial, and then all of a sudden, and Lance Armstrong, cancer survivor, came in at 55 hours and 57 minutes. I have no idea how long those things are. And I was like, that's an important part of him? Boy, I keep saying it like that's all he is. So we can use language to totalize, and we have to be careful with that. Because even when it's something someone's proud of, they're not just that. They're not just the quarterback. They're not just disabled. They're not just whatever race they are. So there's, and that separates. So we have to be careful not to make a descriptor a definition of someone. And language affects our relationships because the symbols we use to define our experiences affect how we think and feel about those relationships. The words we use, the way we talk about it, the way changes the way we see it. Words are very, very powerful. And if we are careful with the words we use to describe ourselves, our experience, our understanding, our relationships, we can use words to change those things and our perceptions of those things into what we want them to be. Language also evaluates. We talked about reflecting and shaping our perceptions. It can be loaded, or it sounds innocent, but there's obviously the other side of it coming at you. And of course, we have all been somewhere received and or given the side of language that shows that it can degrade other people. And it can be sneaky degrading too. Well, how neat for you. And language allows for abstract thought, and language can stereotype. All these things that we discussed further when we talk about the power of words and how we use words to interact with other people. When we talked about how language allows for hypothetical thought, it makes us be able to think outside of those immediate base needs that we talked about with the Maslow's hierarchy. Language allows us to get past food, sleep, eat, that makes it so that we have more in life. We can start thinking about where we are, where we're going to go. Language allows us to live in 3 dimensions of time. We can think about the present, we can think about the past, and process through that and learn from that and re-feel that and continue to gain from it. And we can plan for and hope for and live for the future while we're also thinking about right now. And that ability helps us to learn from the past, work in the present, and plan for the future. So that's what can help us. That's how language fosters our personal growth, because we can't do it without words at all. Other ways we use language to allow self-reflection. It allows us to monitor communication, this helps us manage our image. What do we want to put out there? Is what I think I'm putting out there what other people are receiving? That's not okay. What do we need to tweak it so that I can put out to other people what I want them to see? And hopefully we're becoming the person in reality that we want them to see. So who we are, we can manage our self-image and our actual image through that self-reflection. Additionally, when we look at language, we look at speech communities. It's when we share norms. If you have you can have one at work, you can have one socially, culturally, ethnically, familially, religiously, in your neighborhood. You can have a speech culture. Your department has a speech culture. That the way we talk, the way we interact, different words we use, lingo can change. That's just an understanding within that community. There's also gender speech community, which is we're socialized into how we talk, the way women interact with each other, or men interact with each other. I love the example of if 2 women friends went on a long road trip and it was 8, 10, 12 hours and they drove the whole way without talking. You get to the other end and everybody wonders why they're mad at each other, and it could take years of being nice to each other's face while we hold a grudge. What happened? Everyone's so mad. 2 guys go on a road trip together and the whole conversation is like, we'll get something to eat. 4 hours in, and they get back in the car and they drive the next 4 hours and don't say anything, and they both walk away like, good trip, man. So there's just different ways that people in gender speech communities being socialized in these communities. The way women talk with each other, the way men talk with each other, the way men and women talk with each other. So that's part of what that looks like. And we clearly often have misunderstandings in gender speech communities. Some guidelines for improving verbal communication. First of all, engage in that dual perspective. Try to see things from the other person's point of view. Even if you don't agree with it, you could still make the effort to see where they're coming from. That's not hard to do. I think of my best example is, say I had a 14-year-old daughter who wants to go on an overnight camping trip with her 16-year-old boyfriend and all of his friends. That is never going to happen. I will never be allowing that. But I can see where she's coming from. I can see her point of view. She wants to go. It's going to be fun. She doesn't have enough life experience to know why that's probably not the safest situation for her to be in for her long-term goals or for what I want for her. I can see where she's coming from. I understand she thinks I'm no fun and I'm ruining her whole life because she only has the experience of a 14-year-old. I can completely see her perspective and completely disagree with it and stick with mine at the exact same time. But seeing where she's coming from can help me in how I choose to approach presenting what's going to happen, but my perception and my argument. She might still run up the stairs and slam the door and I'm ruining her life and I hate her and I never want to have any fun. But communicating in a listening and respectful manner while trying to understand that perspective can set up a pattern of communication that will be helpful in the future. In this verbal communication, you want to own your own feelings and thoughts. You can't make me feel. You can't make me think. When I can describe your behavior, I'm an expert on your behavior and my feelings and thoughts. You're an expert on your feelings and thoughts and other people's behavior. So when you come into my office and interrupt me, even though I have a do not disturb sign on the door, I feel disrespected, and I think that you don't value my time. Okay, there's no arguing with that. The other person can say, you've described a behavior. They know they came in interrupted, and now I'm owning my feelings and how I feel about it. And they can say, oh, I didn't even think about that. I didn't realize that it applied to me, but sometimes I need you immediately, so can we come up with a better situation, whatever. But when I own my own feelings and thoughts, people don't get defensive. Oh my gosh, you don't respect me. You don't even care about my time. And now, yes, I do. Where do you get that? And now I can have a fight because they have to be defensive because I've accused them of something rather than owning my feelings and describing behavior. We want to respect what other people say about their feelings and thoughts. Nothing gets me irritated more than when someone tells me I don't think what I think. No, you don't think that. Excuse me. Or that's ridiculous. It's very belittling to tell people that they're overreacting or making a mountain out of a molehill. I promise you this, even when they are, there is never going to be a situation where if someone is totally blowing something out of proportion, that's the right thing to say in that moment. So first thing, we may need to have that conversation, but I'm going to need to calm you down first. So if they're upset, they're upset. So let's talk about, it's okay to be disappointed. I understand you're upset. It's valid that you're angry about this. Let's talk about the situation. Let's talk that down. And then strive for accuracy and clarity. Those levels of abstraction. You ever had a conversation with someone where you discuss through the whole thing, you've made a plan, you're absolutely sure you both understand the plan, and then you go left and they go right, and you're like, well, I thought we... And they're like, we did, because... Or watched two people have a fight where they're arguing the same side of it. Yeah, that's an issue there as well. So you want to make sure that you use quality language, descriptive language, be as accurate as possible, and ask questions for clarity. So that is some of the stuff for verbal communication and Chapter 4. So we're going to talk a little bit about Chapter 5, and then you'll be done for week 2. Finally, we're going to look at Chapter 5 and the world beyond words. So nonverbal communication is all aspects of communication other than words. So other than the words themselves, that's nonverbal, and different depending on which research you're looking at and how they define nonverbal. We're up to 93%. It's 93% of your communication is nonverbal. It's in the tone of your voice, the speed of your words, your facial expressions, your body language, your artifacts, the clothes you're wearing, the time, everything. So 93% of that. So one, it means in writing, means your words are that much more important since you're missing so much. Anybody who's ever been in a text message argument they didn't know they were in knows that it's very difficult to get tone to come across in writing, and that can happen. So there's also a lot of similarities between verbal and nonverbal communication. Like verbal communication, nonverbal communication is symbolic. We can see in this picture that this nonverbal communication, which is a reflected picture, he's not actually saluting with the wrong hand, the picture's just printed backwards. This communicates so much, but it symbolizes respect, it symbolizes that one of them is in charge of the other. This is also an example of rule-guided nonverbal communication that exists within that military culture. As with verbal communication, nonverbal communication can be unintentional or intentional, and nonverbal communication also reflects culture. The things that are acceptable, the way, shaking hands or bowing, or when we stand when people leave, or whatever is important in our culture, those things that show respect or show deference or show different things non-verbally, there are different behaviors in different cultures to show that. and like bowing in some Asian cultures that shows respect for the elderly reflects doing that, or people who are your elders. Doing that reflects that culture that reveres and respects elders in that same way. There's also differences between verbal and nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication tends to be perceived as more believable. This is because it's easy for people to say words they don't mean. You can just make it up. But we perceive nonverbal communication as subconscious or unintentional. We have whole shows, television shows, whole television shows based on, the main character, someone's ability to read other people's nonverbal or be hyper observant of those nonverbal clues. Psych, The Mentalist, Lie to Me, those types of things. Based on that there's those giveaways, those telltale signs in people's nonverbal. And people can, of course, control that, but it is believed, it is more believed nonverbal communication because it is more difficult and perceived as more subconscious in that way. In the documentary Secrets of Body Language, there's a lot of information about analyzing celebrities and politicians, and especially looking back, we can look back and analyze when we know, they weren't telling the truth, and here are all the signs I saw. And some of it seems a little bit like, hindsight's 2020. But other stuff is documented where this is my perception of that information, and then later we discover that's not, and we can see a lot of those self-touch things where people are rubbing their hands together and what that means, or the eyes going one way while the hands are going the other, and people are trying to be diverting, and it's just perceived as more believable. It's not necessarily always true, but it is a perception thing. Nonverbal communication is also multi-channeled in the way that verbal communication has one channel, words. Nonverbal communication has the way you stand, the speed at which you talk, the way your face looks, what you're wearing, what time it is, how late you were. All of those different channels are channels of nonverbal communication. The way you decorate your house, whether or not you call when you say you're going to call, like all of those things. And nonverbal communication is continuous. You can't stop. If you're asleep, you're communicating that you're not listening and that you're tired. If you did, you're communicating that you're not listening and all those, always. In the fact that you live or have lived, you have stuff or used to have stuff, just everything about you that isn't words communicates something non-verbally. So you got to be aware of that. So we look at the principles of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication may supplement or replace verbal communication. I can nod or shake my head instead of saying yes or no. But I can also say go ahead while I'm moving my hand in that circular go ahead motion. I can say I don't know while I shrug my shoulders, so it's supplementing it. Or I can just look quizzical and replace it completely. Nonverbal communication can regulate our interaction quite easily. We can look at stop and go. I hold up a hand for stop. I wave you forward for go. That regulates our interaction. In the classroom, it regulates our interaction. A student raises their hand. They wait for me to point at them. Those are nonverbal communications that regulate when and who is talking. We can use nonverbal as we're walking along. We put our hand on someone's back to guide them into a room, all of those things. But also the way we dress, the way we present ourselves, those things regulate that as well. And nonverbal communication often establishes relationship level meanings. That means the way we interact with ourselves non-verbally says something about the relationship that we have. There's that idea of proxemics that we talk about in this chapter. How close someone's allowed to stand to someone else says something, especially in Western culture, about their relationship with each other, the way we respond, the liking, the concepts of power that are explained in nonverbal. If I have the great big corner penthouse office, it is a nonverbal communication of who's the boss, right? So, nonverbal communication, I'm 15 minutes late for my doctor's appointment, I have to reschedule. I'm on time for my doctor's appointment, wait an hour in the waiting room, wait an hour in the doctor's office, and he shows up late, and hopefully he apologizes, but I just take it, it communicates something about the need in that relationship. Principles of nonverbal communication also, that our nonverbal communication reflects and expresses our cultural values. You have cultures in the world, they're very expressive, very affectionate, and that expresses a value in their culture of that family and that connection and that affection. And then we can see in other cultures where it's more stoic and honorable and education, and perhaps that is more expressed in that value. But cultures are more than our geographic culture, our ethnic culture, those types of things. You have your family culture values are expressed in the nonverbal interaction. Your neighborhood culture, state culture, all different cultures. Your work culture can be expressed in that. You have different jobs where you could do the punching thing, or you could decorate your office however you wanted. And then there's other places where you have all the cubicles and they all look the same. And that nonverbal communication also communicates something about that work culture. So when we look at different types of nonverbal communication, we have kinesics, haptics, physical appearance, artifacts, environmental factors. Of course, as you do your reading, you'll get more information. But kinesics is movement, the nonverbal communication of how we move ourselves. Haptics is touch, the nonverbal communication that comes from the way we touch each other. Ritual touch, which sounds all creepy, but it's really like when you meet people, you reach out and shake hands, right? And it's perfectly normal. That is a greeting ritual. So it's a ritual touch. If you think about the fact that since it's a right hand reach across shake, it's normal. Because if you walked up next to someone you were just meeting and grabbed them with your left hand and then just sort of swung it, which is basically the same thing, you'd be a total creeper. Because that specific ritual haptics touch is acceptable. And there's different things that communicate. If I walked around the classroom and stuck a stethoscope down your back or started thumping on your back and be like, that sounds good, I'm a weirdo. But you'll sit through a whole conversation with your doctor without him even telling you what he's doing and allow him to do that. Your physical appearance communicates something. We dress up in our shirt and tie for our big important things, or we make sure we're in our best for different things. We communicate respect of other people when we look like we've made an effort for a job interview. We look tired or haggard or like we belong at the other Walmart, depending on what our physical appearance is. Artifacts are the things you add to yourself or around your space to communicate something. So the type of jewelry I add to my physical appearance, or the things I have around my office, the things I have around my house, the things I have around my important spaces or around me, communicate about me to other people. If you walk into my living room, you learn something about me. There's a nonverbal communication there in those artifacts. If you walk into, especially my office, part of my office, you learn something about me. There's communication in those artifacts. And then environmental factors are other things. It's time to get up. It's time to go to bed. We have a more difficult time being productive in the winter. Same 24 hours, guys. But when you get off work in the dark, that's it. The day's over. You go home and go to bed. But in the summer, you get off work at exactly the same time, but it's light outside, so I can run errands, get things together. We can all go on a picnic. Let's go boating. There's all kinds of time in those same 24 hours, because the sun up, the sun down communicates something. The environment of a classroom communicates something. When you walk into our college classroom, it's fine for a college classroom. If you walked into your first grader's classroom and it was decorated the same way, you'd be like, what? Because that teacher has set up in a learning, colorful, happy, fun first grader environment, and it communicates something in that way as well. Proxemics and personal space, talked about that a little bit. How close we are to people, proximity, how much we need our personal space, or how much we feel invaded in our personal space, explains something about the relationship. I was thinking just, if I'm sitting down and my nephew comes running down the hall and jumps on me and gives me a big hug and a kiss, he's all up in my space all the time, laying all over me. Because he's my nephew. And even with another little kid, if I didn't know that little kid, that'd be weirder. But it would be even more weird if an adult did it, There's just that how we interact with people in our personal space and how much or how little personal space is required communicates something about that relationship in that proximity. Chronemics communicate something, the way we use time, the way we talk about time, the way we function in time, the way we talk about later abstractly, or 7 a.m., or do you mean 7 a.m. or do you mean 7-ish a.m.? Time of day that we do things. Late, are we early? Those communicate things. So we use time as a nonverbal communicator. And then paralanguage, I've used it a lot just giving this lecture. Those almost like words things. Let me think. Yada, yada, yada. And also the way we use our voice to say things that aren't quite words. That's paralanguage. But it communicates something. And when I say it communicates I'm using filler words. I'm stressed out maybe. I don't know. So, and then silence can communicate things. And depending on context, silence communicates different things. I'm listening. I'm waiting. I'm ignoring you. It can do a lot with that. So finally, just looking at a few guidelines for improving your nonverbal communication. First of all, monitor it. Pay attention to what you're doing and how you're standing and what you're communicating with your appearance and with your body language and with your artifacts, your space that you use professionally and personally. What are you communicating to yourself and to other people? So first of all, pay attention to that. And then really is really key on this one is to interpret others' nonverbal communication tentatively. Because with the nonverbal, I'm using my experience to interpret your behavior. So let's go back to that perceptions idea where I know I can't have a perfect perception and give you the benefit of doubt. Let me be tentative, I always say benign if not benevolent. Either they meant nothing if they didn't mean well. So if they meant nothing if they didn't mean well. And I also say if people want to be offensive, I'm going to make them come right out and say it. So if they behave non-verbally in a way that communicates to me something that I think is really disrespectful, then I'm going to point that out. I'm not really sure if you meant this, but when you do this, I feel disrespected, or I feel like you're trying to ignore me, you're trying to hurt me. Is that what you're... And they can either be like, oh no, okay, then I'll take your word for it. And if they own it, then they're going to have to come right out and say it. So that's how I work with that one. And we're looking again at context and personal qualifications. So the contextual qualifications are what's going on in that moment. So, and if they're doing that thing where the bouncy legs and they're hopping and folding their arms while you're listening, or they really just want you to shut up so they can get out of there because, oh my gosh, they can't even stand to be around you. Or look around. Is it freezing and it's 2 o'clock in the morning? So those context clues might say they're just cold and trying to stay awake. Maybe because they want to stay and listen. So let's be tentative with those contextual qualifications. And then again, those personal qualifications. And that goes back to interpreting people on their own terms and avoiding that fundamental attribution error and being person-centered. So if I am interpreting this behavior, this nonverbal behavior that's coming across seems completely incongruent with the person I know you to be and the relationship I know we have, then I'm going to be really tentative because obviously I'm person-centered. Your personal qualifications say to me that what I'm getting is not what you would be saying. You would never do that. And so give that person the benefit of your understanding of who they are. So those are just some things over the first part of this, which is the first recording of Chapter 3, 4, and 5, just to give you some highlight and some review for Week 2. And I will see you for Week 3.